Welcome everyone around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. This will be a pretty short video because there's only a certain amount of verses to go through to prove this. But for this video here, I'm going to show that in the New Testament, there is not even any evidence that Jesus was worshipped, in the sense that Trinitarians say that Jesus, is God, and therefore, he's getting all the godly worship, right? I'm just going to prove that in the New Testament there's no evidence of that. And I'm going to thoroughly prove it. Excuse me. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for the term worship in the New Testament. And what we get is we get 27 results in the whole Bible. We get 23 results in the New Testament. Now, this is a stark contrast to if you were to put this into the KJV, for example, which is a very bad translation of the Bible. But when you put it into the KJV and search for the term worship, you get, or I'll do it again. There's like 70 something or 80 something. Here we go. KJV. You get 188 uses in the Bible. A huge amount more, and 73 in the New Testament. And it's very deceptive because when people think that they should worship Jesus, that the Bible actually says you should and that people did, in their mind they're usually referring back to verses that you would find in like the KJV where they've altered words. But it's quite alarming just how many extra. I mean, you have 27 compared to 73. That's like 40 something words that have been altered into worship. And I'm going to go through the short list, right? But I went through the list in the KJV before making the video, and in most of the cases they changed the word bow or bowing to worship, which are technically two different things, because, and I'll get into that, because you can bow to somebody like a boss or the ruler of a nation, excuse me, but there's a big difference between bowing and showing obeisance to somebody and actually worshiping them as Almighty God. And I just want to point out now, in case I forget later, as rabbis have pointed out, in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, when King David was sitting on the throne of David, it is said that he was sitting on the throne of God and that he was worshipped. Okay, so we know King David wasn't God, right? So, but thankfully, I don't even have to get into deep argument like that or deep debate. I don't have to go that deep with us. That further proves the point that even if it did, in a few instances, say that Jesus blah blah blah, one would argue, well, the Old Testament King David was worshipped and he sat on the throne of God. You see what I mean? It's the use of terminology and stuff. That's basically being used to describe it in a poetic sense. King David is not sitting on the actual throne of God. It's a poetic description of the throne, that the throne of man, but that God has appointed and worked so hard over and blah blah blah. So it's like the throne of God. It's just a poetic talk, right? Likewise, it wouldn't surprise me if such was in the New Testament, but there isn't, though. That's the thing. So what we have to do is also realize there's a difference between praise. You can praise a child. You can praise a dog. Praising Jesus, you like in the heavenly vision, where the creatures fall down and they praise and this and that there. That's praising somebody. That's different than worshiping. Worshiping involves you're thinking that this one is Almighty God, because you should only worship God, right? So if you worship anything, it's got to be God. So worship denotes the recognition of this figure, whoever it might be in your case, as God. Okay, that's the key element. So that's a big difference between bowing, doing obeisance, or giving praise to somebody. You see what I mean? So if we search the proper translation, the original, for the word worship, we get those 27 results, and 23 in the New Testament. Now check this out. I have no control over this. This is just what the Bible has. Okay? So I'm going to go through every single one of these. I'll read them quickly. They're all short little ones. It shouldn't take more than a couple minutes. But without me interjecting, you can clearly see that pretty much, or virtually, every single one of these literally says people worshiping God. And none of them say Jesus. Okay? In Matthew 15:9, and in vain do they worship me, teaching teachings, commands of men. This is actually a quote from the Tanakh that God says, and it's about God speaking. In Mark 7:7, and in vain do they worship me, teaching teachings, commands of men. John 4:20, our fathers in this mountain did worship, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where it behooveth to worship. John 4:21, Jesus saith to her, Woman, believe me that there does come an hour when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall ye worship the Father. In John 4:22, ye worship what ye have not known. We worship what we have known, because the salvation is of the Jews. In John 4:23, but there cometh an hour, and it now is, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father also does seek such to worship him. In John 4:24, God is a spirit, and those worshiping him in spirit and truth it does behoove to worship. In John 9:31, and we have known that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone may be a worshipper of God and may do his will, him he does hear. In John 12:20, and there were certain Greeks out of those coming up that they may worship in the feast. In Acts 8:27, and having arisen he went on, and lo, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch, a man of rank, of Candace the queen of the Ethiopians, who was over all her treasure, who had come to worship to Jerusalem. Acts 16:14, and a certain woman by name Lydia, a seller of purple of the city of Thyatira, worshiping God, was hearing, whose heart the Lord did open to attend to the things spoken by Paul. Acts 17:4, and certain of them did believe and attached themselves to Paul and to Silas, also of the worshipping Greeks a great multitude, of the principal women also not a few. Acts 17:17, therefore indeed he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and with the worshipping persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who met with him. Acts 17:23, for passing through and contemplating your objects of worship, he's talking to the Greeks, I found also an erection on which had been inscribed, to God unknown, whom therefore not knowing ye do worship. This one I announce to you. Acts 18:7, and having departed thence he went to the house of a certain one by name Justus, a worshipper of God, whose house was adjoining the synagogue. Acts 18:13, saying, against the law this one does persuade men to worship God. This is when they're accusing Jesus. Acts 19:27, it's a big paragraph, but it's talking about how the whole world worshipped Artemis, right? Goddess Artemis, the temple, blah, 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 whom all Asia and the world does worship. There you go. Let's save a huge paragraph. Acts 24:11, thou being able to know that it is not more than 12 days to me since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. Acts 26:5, knowing me before from the first, if they may be willing to testify, that after the most exact sect of our worship I lived a Pharisee. Colossians 2:18, let no one beguile you of your prize, delighting in humble-mindedness and in worship of the messengers, intruding into the things he has not seen, being vainly puffed up by the mind of his flesh. Last three verses, Colossians 2:23, which are indeed having a matter of wisdom and will worship. Which are indeed having a matter of wisdom and will worship, and humble-mindedness and neglecting of body, not in any honor unto its satisfying of the flesh. 2 Thessalonians 2:4, who is opposing and is raising himself up above all called God or worship, so that he in the sanctuary of God as God is sat down, showing himself off that he is God, the day does not come. In Revelation 11:1, and there was given to me a reed like to a rod, and the messenger stood, saying, rise and measure the sanctuary of God, and the altar, and those worshiping in it. So, quite clearly, we have gone through every one of the examples of the word worship in the New Testament, and not one of them was about worshiping Jesus. Not one of them. And this is the base word worship, which would include within the search result worships, worshiping, worshipped. You see what I mean? So there is no verse in the New Testament where Jesus is worshipped. Not at all. Not at all. And actually, people will think, oh, well, I thought there were verses that say that they worship the Lamb, right? Or this and that there. So, but that doesn't exist, because no such thing. But let's just try it just in case, right? It's impossible, but yeah, it doesn't exist. So nowhere does it say worship in Lamb. How about praise in Lamb? Because surely there's verses in Revelations in the New Testament where they saw the heavenly vision and all the angels and the beings were worshiping the Lamb, right? Or praising the Lamb, sorry. Do the search? Nope, that doesn't even exist. That's something I already knew. You don't even find the words praise and Lamb together in the New Testament. They don't occur. So nowhere in the New Testament is Jesus, or AKA the Lamb, worshipped or praised. Nowhere is Jesus worshipped, and nowhere in the New Testament is the Lamb even praised. That sounds crazy, but now it could be. I just thought of this, so let me cover my tracks. But even still, like I said before, praising somebody is not worship. Praising doesn't mean you identify them as God. When you worship something, you're identifying it as God. That's the big difference. But I just had an idea. Praise is the root for praised, and stuff like that. However, if you change it to the different tense praising, the E drops. So maybe it does say praising the Lamb. And it doesn't. That actually surprised me. I honestly thought there were probably going to be a few saying praising the Lamb in like the heavenly visions, but no. Okay, well that's actually a relief because it helps my argument here, but that actually does surprise me. So nowhere to even hear them praising the Lamb. Just out of interest, that would be interesting. Do we have praise Jesus anywhere in the Bible? And it doesn't have to be together as a fixed term, but praise and separately the word Jesus together in the text. We do get 3, and let's read those 3. But again, praising Jesus, I mean, he deserves praise. You know what I mean? It's different than calling him God and worshiping him as God. But let's just read them. I don't know what these say offhand. Matthew 21:16, and they said to him, Hearest thou what these say? And Jesus saith to them, Yes, did ye never read that out of the mouth of babes and sucklings thou did prepare praise? Philippians 1:11, being filled with the fruit of righteousness, that is through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. 1 Peter 1:7, that the proof of your faith, much more precious than of gold that is perishing and through fire being approved, may be found to praise and honor and glory in the revelation of Jesus Christ. Wow, so none of them directly. I mean, I could expand Matthew 21, but it's just not worth it to me. I mean, even if it did say here and there, praise Jesus, that still doesn't prove the Trinity or that he's God. So really, there's zero evidence that Jesus was worshipped or praised in the New Testament, which is kind of surprising. But that just further reinforces the fact that he's not God, because if he was God, you would see that. Okay, so what the KJV and the other translations do is they alter the word to bow, bowing, bowed, and stuff like that there. The Old Testament uses the term, let me just check on that again, obeisance. Yeah, obeisance occurs, but it does not occur in the New Testament. It occurs 36 times in the Old Testament. Obeisance, without looking up the definition, I mean, obeisance is like bowing and doing a recognition of authority to somebody, something like that there. I mean, I could be, but it's irrelevant to my search here, so there's no point me wasting more time in doing that, right? That's generally what I think it means, but it's not in the New Testament, so it doesn't matter. But let's look up bow. I used to think it was in the New Testament, but apparently it's not. So if we look up the word bow, we then get 415 results in the whole Bible, 349 in the Old Testament, excuse me, and 66 in the New Testament. Remember, before we had 23 examples where it actually does say worship, and then the KJV and other such translations alter the word bow and its variants to the word worship, and that increased the number from 23 up to 73. So you're looking at an additional 50 alterations. So we would probably expect to see an additional 50 here when we look for, well, sorry, no, we wouldn't see the 23 because they say worship, not bow. That's true. So we should expect to see roughly 50 verses here, something like that. And what do we get in 50 verses which have altered um, the word to bow, if you see what I mean? You know what I mean. So we get 66 in the New Testament. That's a close enough number, so that confirms the suspicion, right? So, because you're going to have instances where people are just bowing to people, right? Now, I am not going to go through and read all 66 here, but I can give some examples from here. I'm not going to go through it on stream. I've already gone through it personally, right? But to save time, I'll just bring up some examples, right? Matthew 2:2 saying, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and we came to bow to him." Right? That's an example which is changed to worship in the other Bible translations. Right? We came to worship him. So when you think of people coming to worship a baby, you think that baby must be God. You see what I mean? But no, they just came to bow to him, which you do to somebody of greater authority. Right? And I'll prove that from the Old Testament, the Tanakh, with verses where that was done. Okay, so Matthew 2:11, having come to the house, they found the child with Mary his mother, and having fallen down, they bowed to him, and having opened their treasures. So there we go. Interesting. Matthew 4:10, then Jesus saith to him, Go, adversary, for it has been written, The Lord thy God thou shalt bow to, and him only thou shalt serve. Jesus didn't say, bow down and worship me. He said you should only bow to God. And Matthew 8:2, another example, and lo, a leper, having come, was bowing to him, Jesus, saying, Sir, if thou art willing, thou art able to cleanse me. But it doesn't, it says bowing, right? It doesn't say worshiping like the altered translations say, right? Just bowing. Another example, Matthew 9:18, lo, a ruler having come was bowing to him, right? So we know for a fact that 50 verses that say worship in the other translations actually say bow, right? So out of these 66, about 50 of them are going to be that, right? I'm just going to skim through just to keep time down for the viewers. Well, no, that's not a good one, but I'll read it. Mark 15:19, it's where they were mocking Jesus. And they were smiting him on the head with a reed and spitting on him, and having bent the knee, were bowing to him. Mark 5:6, and having seen Jesus from afar, he ran and bowed before him. He didn't run and worship before him, he ran and bowed before him. Luke 24:52, another example. And they, having bowed before him, did turn back to Jerusalem with great joy. So maybe, to save the time, like I said, most of them, that's what you see. A lot of them, actually, I'm looking at here, is the word bowels, but because bow is a root in the word bowels, they're in the searches too. There's a couple of those. But the majority of these are just that simple alteration. Oh, let's read some ones from Revelations, actually. Because, in my mind, like most people's minds, in the back of my mind, I'm pretty sure there were verses where they're like praising the Lamb, but there weren't. But praising something in the heavenly vision. So let's check that out. Revelation 4:10. Fall down, do the 24 elders before him who is sitting upon the throne. This is a reference to God, because I covered that in another video. And bow before him who is living to the ages of the ages. And they cast their crowns before the throne, saying, yeah, I did a video on this once before. I probably removed it from my channel because it was so super long. But I went through every single thing meticulously, and all the references to this heavenly worship were going to God on the throne. And the one sitting on God's throne was God, not somebody else. It was the Lamb who comes up to the throne of God, because only he, the Lamb, was able and worthy to open the scrolls. Of course God is, because God is the owner of the scrolls. The only other one was the Lamb, right? And it's forbidden to portray God as a quadruped beast, like Romans 1 and the whole Tanakh says. So God would never portray himself as a lamb in a heavenly vision. Okay? He would not be subservient unto himself either, right? Nor does he set conditions or laws for himself. You know what I mean? That only these things can have. He can only open the scrolls after this. Like, he's God. He can do what he wants. You know what I mean? But, so Revelation 5:14, and the four living creatures said, Amen, and the 24 elders fell down and they bow before him who is living to the ages of the ages. Revelation 7:11, and all the messengers stood around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell upon their face and bowed before God. Actually, let's expand that. Because what if there's something like that that says bow before God and the Lamb? But no, because you can bow before Jesus. That's right. So that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It really is. But let's just open it just for the sake of it. Because I like to do all my study unbiased. No? Yeah, I'm right. Yep. Fell upon their face and bowed before God, saying, Amen. The blessing and the glory and the wisdom and the thanksgiving and the honor and the power and the strength are to our God, to the ages of the ages. Amen. Yep, okay, well, nope, that does prove my point. So, kind of good that I did open that up. Let's see, what else we got in Revelations? Talking about the bad people bowing before demons. Revelations 11:16, and the 24 elders who are before God are sitting upon their thrones did fall upon their faces and did bow before God. Another piece of proof. Let's open that up too to be unbiased though. 11:16. Bow before God, saying, We give thanks to thee, O Lord God, the Almighty, who art and who was, who art coming, because thou hast taken thy great power and did reign. Yep, again confirms it's God, who is clearly, again, the Alpha and Omega, and it's God, so yep, further proven again. Then it talks about people bowing before the dragon, bowing before the beast, so those are irrelevant verses, bowing before the image of the beast. Revelation 14:7, saying in a great voice, Fear ye God, and give to him glory, because come did the hour of his judgment, and bow ye before him, who did make the heaven and the land, the sea, and the fountains of waters. More about bowing before the beast. There's actually a lot of Revelation ones. Revelation 19:4, and fall down did the elders again, etc., etc., and they did bow before God, who is sitting upon the throne, saying, Amen. I'm not going to read all of these. We'll be here for a while longer. So, there's 4 examples from Revelations where John went to bow before the messenger, and the messenger corrected him in Revelation 22:9, and he saith to me, See not, for fellow servant of thee am I, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of those keeping the words of this scroll, before God bow. So, like I admitted, I didn't go through the whole 66 here to be meticulous like I did with the first list, because we'll be here for a lot longer. I don't want this video to be long. But it doesn't matter if people bowed to Jesus. We know they did. That doesn't mean that he's God. You know what I mean? You can bow to a military leader. You can bow to a political leader. You know what I mean? If you bow down with your face to the earth and you kiss the earth and all that, even that was done to like the lording angels that are under God, the angels that have lordship over regions and people, right, in the Bible. In Joshua 15, I think it is. Joshua, I think the biblical character in that passage from Joshua 15 did that utter obeisance, and he bowed down and did that to the earth, right? That's like the greatest form of bowing and obeisance, and that was done to the prince of the host. So that was to an angel, who I believe was Jesus, right? The primordial Jesus, right? But nonetheless, we know from the text that he bowed to an angel. So you can do that. But we also know John was told, don't bow to me by the angel. That's probably because, as I've suggested, John thought the angel was Jesus, right? He had that great vision where he heard God's voice first, and then he saw Jesus appear. The description of his start in Revelation 1 says a vision of Jesus, whatever it says, right? Check it out for yourself, right? So it was a confusing, conflicting thing for him. He heard God speak first, then he saw Jesus, and then there was an angel with him showing him all this, You know what I mean? So he probably thought that the angel was Jesus. That's why he went to go bow to him, right? And the angel said, no, 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 don't bow to me, because he was probably thinking that Jesus was, maybe for a moment he considered Jesus was as great as God, or he was thinking of him too high. That's why the angel corrected him, because biblically people bow to people, like I'll prove with Old Testament examples. And biblically people bowed to angels, right? You do reverence, right? But you don't worship them as God. So when John bowed to the angel, he probably had in mind this divinity level, because he was just getting confused. He was probably overcome by the mighty vision and seeing Jesus and the glory, and he couldn't comprehend it. So maybe he was elevating it too much, and the angel had to correct him, saying, no, 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 I'm not God, you know what I mean? And only worship God. So he was corrected. So there's no proof, there's no evidence that Jesus was worshipped or anything like that there. So this just comes back to non-Trinitarian doctrine that, if Jesus isn't God, then you should not be thinking of him as God. You should not be worshiping him as God, because he was a man. The New Testament calls Jesus a man. He called himself the Son of Man. He's called the seed of man in the New Testament. Let me find that verse. Right? He's described as a mortal son of man in many places, which is what Messiah was supposed to be according to the Tanakh prophecies, right? He's the seed of David. So he's a physical, generated, born child, right? From the lineage. You can trace back to the lineage genetically. So let's see, where is this verse here? Well, here's one example. Galatians 3:16, and to Abraham were the promises spoken, and to his seed. And he does not say unto seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. And that's another little good piece of proof that Jesus had to be the seed, right? Seed is sperm. Seed is sperm. Women don't make seed. The seed is a man. It's a male thing throughout the Old Testament. Seed of man. If Jesus was the seed of David, the seed of man, right? Then he's from a male father. He's not from God in a magical virgin birth. He was a mortal, biological creature, therefore legitimately able to claim the tribe of Judah through his father biologically. Whereas if he wasn't, if he was God, God wouldn't come from male seed. So God would have to be virgin born. That's how the pagan myth got incorporated into Christianity, right? That's the thing. But he wasn't God. He was a man. Like the New Testament says, like the Old Testament decrees he must be, right? I mean, Moses' first prophecy, where it talks about a prophet like me, right? Like, listen, let's go look at Deuteronomy 18:18. Let's go read that. All the verses that describe Messiah, when you read about them, he's a man. And nowhere is it talked about that man being God, right? Let's go look this up real quick. Yeah, well, this is all I need to read. I didn't need to open it. Deuteronomy 18:15. A prophet out of thy midst, out of thy brethren, like to me, does Jehovah thy God raise up to thee. Unto him ye hearken. There's no talk of him being God. And I don't want to get into the whole El and Elohim and El Gabor thing and all of that again, but El Gabor means, to save time, El Gabor does not mean mighty God. That's a mistranslation of the Hebrew, and any rabbi will teach you that. They speak Hebrew, they know Hebrew, they have the original Hebrew. It's also a myth that, the reality is, just to be honest, the Masoretic text was recopied in the year 1090 or something AD, but the Hebrew original text from which the Masoretic copy was written is much older. The Hebrew, what is called, it's a play on words. there's many other examples where there's plays on words and things in everyday life, right? But the original Hebrew text is what the Septuagint was copied from. The Septuagint wasn't imagined out of the clouds. It was copied from the Hebrew text that the Jews had. And this is known to the Jews as the original Hebrew Masoretic. Okay? And when they made the Masoretic text in the year 1000 something, they copied that. Okay, that's the difference. The Septuagint is a copy of the original. That's why the original Hebrew is the only one to trust. And in the original, it does not say mighty God. That is not how Hebrew operates. The Hebrew language, those words don't even translate to mighty God. El doesn't mean God. That's the first problem. El means mighty. That's its direct definition and use biblically. It's mighty. And there's countless places where people, men, fathers, husbands are called El in the Bible. And Gabor doesn't mean mighty. Okay, again, it's a conflation of the words. El means mighty, and Gabor means warrior. Okay, so El Gabor, the Hebrew reading of it, as it actually is, not my opinion, but from any rabbi on the planet who knows, grew up speaking Hebrew, has the original Hebrew, they would tell you El Gabor means mighty hero. It doesn't mean mighty God. That's the first problem. And where it says eternal Father, it doesn't even say Father in the Hebrew. The way because when you combine different Hebrew letters and words, it can change entire meanings and context, right? And if you have an outside understanding of Hebrew, I'm not saying I have a full understanding. I'm going by all the Hebrew lessons I've, learned from rabbis and all of that, right? So it's not my own invention. But when you're from the outside looking in, you don't know how the Hebrew language works. Like me, I know a little bit from what I've learned. You just think, oh, you could combine words like Lego, but it doesn't work like that. It alters entire words and meanings and context when you combine different letters or words, right? So it doesn't say eternal Father. The actual Hebrew reading of that term is eternal ruler. And that's a striking difference. And that's why it's the Trinitarians who altered all these translations and words. It's the Trinitarians because they wanted people to adhere to their pagan philosophy. That's the problem. That is the unfortunate problem. The Trinity didn't even exist in the early churches. That's historically proven. All the early churches were non-Trinitarian. The only historical records of a Trinity being taught, and the minds of individuals can come up with anything at any time. When we're talking about a body or an authority teaching the Trinity, that didn't occur for a couple hundred years. And the reality is that Constantine was a Luciferian. He did not worship God or Jesus. He had no intent to do that. He was a straight out Luciferian. I have an 800-page book by the Masons where they openly talk about Constantine's membership and how he ruled one of the knighthoods of Masonry in Rome at the time. And it was his intent to create an altered and pagan version of Christianity, a pagan version that would incorporate all the pagan mysteries, right? So it's really an abomination. That's really what it is. And it's idolatry. It's turning monotheism into polytheism and trying to explain it away as monotheism. And the problem with that is that you're breaking the first commandment, the Shema of Israel. And, even if you're under Gentile law, Jesus bound us to that first command. And, outside of that, the Gentile law says you shall not commit idolatry. And while this, I've heard a rabbi explain in the truest sense of the Hebrew understanding of, in the Jewish understanding of it, he says that Gentiles can still be allowed to have other gods, but they should not make idols, like physical idols. He says that's the worst condition. But he says God is more tolerant and he allows Gentiles to have other deities. They're still going to get in trouble for it, right? But he's tolerant to that as long as they don't make idols. If they make idols, like physical idols, then they'll be stricken down or whatever, right? That's what some rabbis give as the rabbinical or Jewish opinion. It's not that every rabbi or Jew believes that. That's just some of their opinion, right? So The problem is you're breaking Gentile law. You're having another God. You're calling a man God. It's all forms of blasphemy rolled into one. Okay, if you say paganism, polytheism, it's having more than one God, and it's guilty of that. That's Trinitarianism, guilty of that. It's also blasphemy because you're calling a creature, the created, you're calling that as God, and God is not created, and he is not a creature, and he is not a man, nor a son of man born of a woman, which he affirmed in the Tanakh. Okay, so that's blasphemy. So you have paganism, you have blasphemy, then you have idolatry because you're portraying something as God which is not God, which was Jesus. So you got all three forms of the greatest sins against God rolled into one. That's why God gave the first commandment as the first commandment, right? And when you start to add to or take away from his word is when you start playing with fire. Okay, and that's where you're going to start getting in trouble breaking these great commandments. And that's what Trinitarianism is. You cannot teach the doctrine of Trinitarianism with the solely within the first commandment. If you read the first commandment, you do not see any evidence of the Trinity. It's the exact opposite command. It rebukes a concept like the Trinity. That's the problem. So when you're worshiping Jesus as God, that's the issue. If you're saying all your prayers to Jesus and none to God, that is a severe issue. It's not that Jesus won't hear him, but you're really going to be ticking off God because you should be praying to God. And yes, you can pray to Jesus. I mean, that's a gray area. I mean, I think every Christian thinks about that at times, what to do. But a lot of people praise and worship Jesus like he's God and do everything with Jesus, and they leave God out of the picture. And, yes, they might have Jesus, but they're committing idolatry, blasphemy, paganism. You know what I mean? All those things rolled into one, and it's very, very scary. It's disrespectful to God. We wouldn't have Jesus if we didn't have God. So how can you leave God out of the picture? Even Jesus said, everything I do, everything I say, all the miracles I do, all the forgiveness that happens, it's God doing it, not me. Right? So Jesus didn't do anything. He was the vessel in which God tabernacled. That's the difference. That's why Jesus said, God is within me. Do not call me good, only God is good. I go on to my Father because my Father is greater than I. All these instances where Jesus made it clear, and oh God, my God, or he says my God, where he's dying on the cross. He says Eloi, Eloi, sabachthani, or whatever. My God, why have you forsaken me? And actually, while we're on the topic, if we search the New Testament for that term, my God, we see a lot of times Jesus referring to the Father as his God, right? There's 12 examples in the New Testament of the term my God. First one, Matthew 27:46. It's my God, why did thou forsake me? It's repeated again in Mark 15:34. In John 20, verse 17, Jesus saith to her, Be not touching me, for I have not yet ascended unto my Father, and be going on to my brethren, and say to them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and to your God. And then we have in Romans 1:8, First indeed I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you, that your faith is proclaimed in the world. It didn't say Jesus Christ who is God or anything like that, because Jesus is the intermediary. He's the mediator between man and God, which is what is taught in the New Testament, right? And, I give thanks to my God. I give thanks to my God. Two examples in Corinthians, right? Again in Philippians, and again in Philippians, and in Philemon, right? And then here we have Jesus again in Revelation 3:12, the best example. Jesus says, He who is overcoming, I will make him a pillar in the sanctuary of my God, and without he may not go any more, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, that does come down out of the heaven from my God, also my new name. This is what Jesus says. He says, my God 4 times, and then throws in at the end, like a sprinkle, also my new name. Right? The other thing is, if Jesus, Yeshua, the Lamb, if he was God, then why does this Old Testament verse say this? This alone disproves the Trinity, right? Is it in Ezekiel? Let's see. Okay, 1 sec. I'll have it in a few seconds. Yeah, here we go. Zechariah. In Zechariah 14, it's the great prophecy about the end times. And in Zechariah 14, it actually says that God comes to the earth at the same time as Messiah. Right? So they're two separate beings, which Trinitarians still admit to, right? But they're two separate ones. Okay, and Messiah is not described as God. Messiah is described as the prince throughout the Old and even New Testament. God is the king. Prince is son of a king. In Zechariah 14:9, though, however, it says, "And Jehovah has become king over all the land. In that day there is one Jehovah, and his name one." Right? Now stop and think. If Jesus was God, we have this first issue. Well, he's the prince, God is the king. Trinitarians all think Jesus is the king because he's God. But no, he's the prince. He's subservient to God. He's lesser than. He is the son of God. He is not God. Right? And right here it says, three things are affirmed by this one little verse. It says, Jehovah has become king over all the land, not Messiah. Not Messiah because Messiah is Jehovah. It says, Jehovah has become king over all the land. In that day there is one Jehovah, right? So it's showing you that God is the king, that there is one God, and it adds in for the third aspect, and his name one. So if Jesus, Yeshua, Yahashua, etc. was God, how would this verse be true? Because a lot of Trinitarians think that Jesus is God. Well, that's more than one name. The fact is, God is one, which you all argue over, right? But we see here evidence that his name is one. I mean, that should be common sense, but here it is laid out in Scripture. His name is one. So how do you explain that? Is Jesus going to stop existing because he is God and it will be a conflict with the Word? No. Does Jesus lose his name? You know what I mean? Jesus said earlier, I get a new name, right? Okay, even if he got a new name, still don't change anything. He can't be God, right? Just as God is not represented as a quadruped beast, and we see the Lamb in all the heavenly visions going up to the throne of God in a subservient manner, okay, as a beast. And there is no way that Almighty God would represent himself as that and be a hypocrite. So anyways, that's it for this video. I want to keep it kind of short. 42 minutes is a little longer than I wanted. So anyways, folks, wanted it like 30 minutes. But anyways, take care, folks. I'll check the comments later.